Good evening. I hope you had a lovely weekend, and I thought I would just quickly jump on and talk a little bit more about my work. Now, when I tell people I'm a motivational speaker, they sometimes just look rather blankly back at me, and at that point I'm aware of the fact that maybe the term motivational speaker is a little bit ambiguous and people don't quite understand what that means. What people need to be doing when they hear that term is asking me what I actually speak about. And when people do ask me that, and I answer the fact that I talk about trauma, they then look at me just as blankly as they did when I said I was a motivational speaker. So I talk mainly about developmental trauma, and most people think that they have never had developmental trauma. When people hear my story, growing up in care, being the victim of quite severe abuse, which resulted in my mum's prison sentence, they then feel even more kind of in denial, maybe, that they couldn't have possibly have suffered trauma because my story sounds so traumatic. But actually, like most things, developmental trauma is on a scale, and psychologists like to call it small t trauma and capital T trauma. So for example, small t trauma is the trauma that you experienced maybe when your parents divorced and you went to live with your dad and that didn't work out and you went back to live with your mom, and that's traumatic. The fact that it happens to you before the age of 18 makes it developmental trauma, but it's what psychologists would call trauma with a small c. The fact that you had a pet, a lovely dog or cat or a different pet that you lost when you were quite young, and you had to deal with bereavement and loss of that pet, that's another example of small t trauma. But it is trauma. It's an emotional upset that you had to deal with before you were adult enough to be able to understand what grief and what loss was all about. And let's face it, even in our adult, dealing with the loss of something so precious to us and our family, such as a pet or our loved ones, is just as traumatic and just as difficult. But once again, if it happens before the age of 18, it is classed as developmental trauma. Capital T trauma is more the type of trauma that I suffered as a child. Abuse, neglect, failure to thrive, not having your physical, emotional, social and cognitive needs met when you were growing up, missing large amounts of school due to your mum's health issues, or your dad becoming an alcoholic, and maybe you witnessed some domestic violence as a child. That would be classed as capital T trauma. And although you might not believe that those things affect you now as an adult, as a psychologist, I speak about the fact that sometimes those issues have affected us deeply and we just haven't realised it. Why would you want to uncover trauma that you don't even think is there? Well, one of the reasons is because trauma affects our everyday lives. It affects our relationships, it affects our self-esteem, our self-concept, our confidence levels, but most importantly, it affects our adult relationships. Those relationships involve intimacy, romance, closeness, vulnerability, and all the things that you need to navigate in a serious relationship. And if you find yourself going from relationship to relationship with lots and lots of issues that are recurring over time, it could be because you have some developmental trauma that you have not yet addressed. So as a motivational speaker, I don't work one-to-one with people who are having thoughts about the trauma that they suffered as a child, but I talk at large conferences, seminars and big events to large audiences about ways in which they can accept, confront, heal and grow from the trauma that they have suffered. I hope that all makes sense, and if it doesn't, please feel free to ask me a question or send me a comment. Have a lovely evening, guys.